Taylor Voss had spent her entire adult life studying maps. She knew every trade route in the consortium. She could name the 17 moons of Carith Prime from memory. She had memorized the location of every fuel station between the core worlds and the outer rim. Maps were her passion, her profession, and her entire reason for existing. So when she noticed the blank zone, she could not simply ignore it. The Galactic Cartographic Institute occupied an entire level of Velar Prime, the massive station world that served as the heart of consortium civilization. Billions of beings lived on Velar Prime. Trillions of credits flowed through its markets every day. And at the center of it all, the Institute maintained the most complete collection of star charts in known space. 12,000 years of exploration, billions of star systems cataloged, every habitable world, every dead moon, every asteroid belt documented with perfect precision. The Institute's archives contained maps of places that no living being had visited in centuries. Their records stretched back to before the founding of the consortium itself. Taylor had access to all of it. As a junior archivist, her job was to organize and maintain these records. She spent her days surrounded by holographic projections of distant galaxies, cross-referencing ancient surveys with modern sensor data. It was quiet work, careful work, the kind of work that suited her patient nature. But 3 weeks ago, something had changed. She had been updating the navigation charts for a merchant guild when she noticed it for the first time. A section of the galaxy's outer arm that appeared on every official map as simply gray. No labels, no system designations, no trade routes or territorial markings. Just empty space, colored the same dull gray that cartographers use to indicate unexplored regions. But this region was not unexplored. Taylor knew this because she could see the boundary line. Someone had drawn a perfect border around this gray zone. Someone had marked it with a simple notation that appeared on every single map in the Institute's collection. The notation read, "Human territorial boundary, passage restricted." Taylor had heard of humans, of course. Everyone had heard of humans. They were one of the galaxy's great mysteries, a species that had appeared on the galactic stage nearly 800 years ago, and then simply vanished behind their borders. They did not trade with the consortium. They did not attend diplomatic summits. They did not participate in the cultural exchanges that connected every other civilization. They simply existed, somewhere beyond that gray boundary, doing whatever it was that humans did. Most people accepted this without question. The galaxy was vast. There were thousands of species, each with their own customs and preferences. If humans wanted to keep to themselves, that was their business. The consortium had more than enough territory to explore without bothering one reclusive species. But Taylor was a cartographer. She could not accept a blank spot on her maps. She began her investigation quietly. First, she searched the Institute's database for any historical records of the gray zone. She expected to find old surveys, perhaps from before humanity arrived. She expected to find trade route proposals that had been abandoned. She expected to find something. The database returned nothing. Not classified, not redacted, simply nothing, as if the data had never existed. This was impossible. The Institute kept records of everything. They had surveys of dead worlds that no one had visited in millennia. They had maps of civilizations that had gone extinct before the consortium was founded. The idea that an entire region of space had no historical records was simply not acceptable. Taylor tried different search parameters. She looked for any mention of the systems that must exist within that gray zone. She searched for references to species that might have lived there before humanity arrived. She even tried searching for the phrase human territorial boundary itself. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Someone had erased an entire section of galactic history. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it made her curious. What had happened in that region? What were the humans hiding? And more importantly, why had the consortium agreed to help them hide it? She decided to ask her supervisor. Vorath was a Kethri, one of the ancient species that had helped found the consortium 12,000 years ago. He had served the Institute for over 3 centuries. His 4 eyes had reviewed more star charts than Taylor would ever see in her lifetime. If anyone knew the truth about the gray zone, it would be him. She found him in his office, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing distant nebulae. He was old, even for a Kethri. His scales had faded from their original bright blue to a pale gray. His movements were slow and careful, but his mind remained sharp, and his eyes focused on Taylor with uncomfortable intensity when she mentioned the blank zone. For a long moment, Voroth said nothing. He simply stared at her with an expression she could not read. Then he spoke, and his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "Some questions are better left unasked, young one." Taylor frowned. "But the records are missing. Someone deleted an entire region of space from our archives. Surely that violates every principle of cartographic integrity." Voroth made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was not a happy sound. "Cartographic integrity. Yes, that is what you are concerned about. Of course it is. The Institute exists to document the galaxy. How can we claim to be the galaxy's mapmakers if we deliberately leave sections blank?" The old Kethri turned away from her. He stared at one of his holographic displays, but Taylor could tell he was not really seeing it. His eyes had gone distant, lost in memories that she could not access. "I was young once," he said finally. "Young and curious, like you. I asked the same questions. I demanded to know why the maps were incomplete. I insisted that truth was more important than politics." He paused. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "The last civilization that demanded answers no longer exists." Taylor felt a chill run through her body. "What do you mean?" But Voroth would not say more. He told her to return to her duties. He told her to forget about the gray zone. He told her that some mysteries were better left unsolved. She left his office with more questions than she had arrived with. That night, alone in her small quarters on Velar Prime, Taylor could not sleep. She kept thinking about Voroth's words. The last civilization that demanded answers no longer exists. What did that mean? Had someone destroyed an entire civilization simply for asking questions about human space? The idea seemed absurd. The consortium had existed for 12,000 years. Its member species had fought wars, certainly. They had experienced conflicts and disagreements. But the complete destruction of a civilization? That was something from ancient history. From the Dark Ages before the great powers had learned to coexist in peace. Unless the humans were not like the other great powers. Unless the humans were something else entirely. Taylor was still wrestling with these thoughts when her personal terminal chimed. She had received an anonymous data packet. No sender identification. No return address. Just a small file, delivered through channels that should not have been possible to trace. She hesitated for a long moment before opening it. The file contained a single image. It was a star chart, obviously ancient, rendered in a visual style that had not been used for at least 1,000 years. But Taylor recognized the region immediately. It was the gray zone. But on this old chart, it was not gray at all. Hundreds of star systems were marked. Dozens of species were cataloged. Trade routes crisscrossed the region like a web. Taylor could see the names of civilizations she had never heard of. The Zorath Imperium, the Melori Federation, the Kingdom of Surath, the Vraxian Hegemony. Thriving civilizations, prosperous worlds, a busy, vibrant section of the galaxy that had once been home to billions of sentient beings. Taylor stared at the image for a long time. She counted the star systems. She noted the population estimates. She traced the trade routes with her eyes, imagining the ships that must have traveled them, the merchants and explorers and diplomats who had lived their lives in that now empty region. Then she looked at the date stamp on the chart. It had been made 812 years ago, just a few decades before humanity made first contact with the consortium. All of those civilizations, all of those worlds, all of those billions of sentient beings. Gone now, the gray zone was not unexplored. It was not restricted for political reasons or diplomatic considerations. It was gray because everything that had once existed there had been erased, and humanity had arrived just in time to take their place. Taylor closed the image. She sat in the darkness of her quarters, her heart beating faster than it should. She understood now why Voroth had been afraid. She understood why the maps were blank. She understood why everyone in the galaxy knew better than to ask questions. But she could not stop now. She had to know what had happened in that region. She had to know what the humans had done. She had to know what kind of beings could erase entire civilizations from existence, and then quietly retreat behind their borders, asking only to be left alone. She had to find someone who remembered. Somewhere in the consortium, there had to be beings old enough to have witnessed what happened 800 years ago. Somewhere, there had to be survivors who knew the truth. Taylor began to plan her investigating. Taylor spent the next 3 weeks gathering information. She worked slowly and carefully, never asking the same question twice, never approaching the same person more than once. She pretended to be researching ancient trade routes. She claimed to be studying pre-consortium civilizations for an academic project. She lied more in those 3 weeks than she had lied in her entire life. And slowly, piece by piece, she began to understand why everyone was afraid. The Melori trade masters changed the subject whenever she mentioned the outer arm. One of them, an elderly merchant with silver scales, actually stood up and left the room when she asked about pre-human civilizations in that region. He did not say goodbye. He did not offer an explanation. He simply walked away as if she had threatened his family. The Vraxian diplomats pretended not to understand her questions. They smiled their cold, reptilian smiles and spoke about trade agreements and cultural exchanges. When she pressed harder, one of them leaned close and whispered something that made her blood run cold. The Zoroth asked questions too, the diplomat said. "Do you know what happened to the Zoroth?" Taylor admitted that she did not. The diplomat's smile grew wider, but his eyes remained empty. "Exactly," he said. "Nobody does." The Consortium Council's official position was that the gray zone was geologically unstable, a ridiculous lie that no one believed, but everyone accepted. Taylor found references to this explanation in documents stretching back centuries. The same words, repeated again and again, as if saying them enough times would make them true. But the truth was out there. Taylor could feel it. Someone, somewhere, knew what had really happened. She found him in a hospice on the far side of Velar Prime. His name was Hamath, and he was a Surath philosopher. The Surath were one of the longer-lived species in the consortium, capable of surviving for over 1,000 years under the right conditions. Hamath was one of the last of his generation, a being who had been alive during the early contact period, nearly 800 years ago. He was dying now. The hospice staff told Taylor that he had only a few weeks left. His body was failing, his organs shutting down one by one. But his mind, they said, remained clear. He still received visitors. He still enjoyed conversation. Taylor found him in a private room overlooking the station's central garden. He was small and frail. His once bright feathers faded to a dull gray. But when he looked at her, his eyes still held the sharp intelligence of a scholar. "You want to know about the humans," he said before she could even introduce herself. "Everyone who visits me now wants to know about the humans." Taylor sat down across from him. "How did you know?" Hamath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Because I am one of the last who remembers. When I die, the truth dies with me. I suppose that is why you are here, to capture my memories before they are lost forever. Will you tell me?" The old Surath was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the garden, watching the artificial breeze stir the carefully cultivated plants. When he spoke again, his voice was soft and distant. "I was a young philosopher when humanity arrived," he began. "Barely 200 years old. The galaxy was very different then. The consortium was smaller, weaker. The real power belonged to the great empires, the dominion of Keth, the Vraxian hegemony, and most powerful of all, the Zoroth Imperium." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The Zoroth ruled 1,000 star systems. They had conquered dozens of species. Their fleets were the largest in the galaxy, their weapons the most advanced. They believed themselves to be the natural rulers of all sentient life, and for many centuries, no one could prove them wrong. What happened when the humans arrived? Taylor asked. Hamath's eyes grew distant. They came quietly. Small ships, primitive by our standards. Their technology was centuries behind the great powers. Their weapons could barely scratch the shields of a Zoroth warship. They had no allies, no resources, no territory beyond their single homeworld. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We thought they were harmless, amusing even. These strange, soft creatures from a backwater planet at the edge of the galaxy. The great powers debated what to do with them. Some wanted to conquer them. Others wanted to study them. The Melori wanted to trade with them. The Vraxians wanted to use them as laborers. And the Zoroth wanted nothing to do with them. They considered humans beneath their notice, too weak to be useful, too primitive to be interesting. They dismissed humanity as irrelevant and turned their attention to more important matters. Hamath closed his eyes, and Tayla could see the weight of memory pressing down on him. But the humans asked for only one thing. They wanted their borders respected. They wanted to be left alone. They explained, calmly and politely, that humanity had endured a difficult history. Wars, famines, disasters. They had learned to survive through terrible times, and now they wanted only peace. That seems reasonable, Tayla said. It was more than reasonable. It was humble, modest. The humans made no threats. They demanded no tribute. They simply asked that no military vessels enter their territory. They said they would defend their borders if necessary, but they hoped it would never come to that. Hamath opened his eyes, and Tayla saw something in them that looked like sorrow. The Zoroth Imperium found this amusing. What could these soft creatures possibly do if their borders were violated? The Zoroth had conquered species far more powerful than humanity. They had crushed civilizations that had existed for millennia. The idea that these primitive beings could resist the might of the Imperium was laughable. They crossed the border, Tayla said. It was not a question. Hamath nodded slowly. The Zoroth Emperor ordered a fleet of 300 warships into human space. Not an invasion force, just a demonstration. A reminder to these newcomers that they existed at the pleasure of the great powers. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Korath, one of the most celebrated warriors in Zoroth history. He fell silent. The artificial breeze stirred the garden outside, but inside the room, everything was still. What happened? Tayla asked. No one knows, Hamath whispered. Not really. The fleet crossed into human space, broadcasting their location and status as required by Zoroth military protocol. For 3 days, everything was normal. Admiral Korath reported that they had encountered no resistance. He described human space as empty, peaceful, almost welcoming. The old philosopher's voice dropped even lower. On the 4th day, the transmissions stopped. All of them, simultaneously, 300 warships, thousands of crew members, the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. Gone, silent, as if they had never existed. Tayla felt her heart beating faster. No distress signals, no sensor data, nothing. The Zoroth Imperium sent scouts to investigate. They approached the border carefully, scanning for debris or energy signatures or any sign of what had happened to their fleet. What did they find? Hamath looked at her, and in his ancient eyes, she saw fear. Real fear, the kind that had lived in his heart for 800 years. They found Admiral Korath, alive, alone, drifting in an escape pod at the exact boundary of human space. His body was unharmed. His escape pod was functioning perfectly. But something was wrong with him. Something fundamental. What do you mean? He never spoke again. Never wrote. Never communicated in any way. The Zoroth brought him back to their homeworld and examined him with every medical technology they possessed. His body was healthy. His brain was undamaged. But his mind was simply empty. Whatever he had witnessed in human space had broken something inside him. Something that could not be repaired. The room fell silent. Tayla could hear her own breathing, slow and steady, even though her heart was racing. The escape pod's recording systems had been wiped, Hamath continued. But there was one detail that the Zoroth investigators noted. Admiral Korath's uniform was clean, freshly pressed. His escape pod had been stocked with food, water, and medical supplies, and attached to his chest was a small paper note, written in perfect Zoroth script. What did it say? Hamath closed his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. It said, "We asked politely. Please do not make us ask again." Tayla sat in stunned silence. She tried to imagine what could have happened to 300 warships. What could have broken the mind of a decorated admiral? What kind of beings could destroy an entire fleet and then carefully, deliberately, return the commander alive and unharmed, dressed in a clean uniform, with a polite note attached to his chest? The Zoroth did not accept this. she said finally. They must have responded. Hamath opened his eyes. In them, she saw the weight of 8 centuries of memory. They did, he said. And that is when the true horror began. Hamath paused for a long moment, his ancient eyes staring at something Taylor could not see. The memories of 800 years weighed heavily on him, and she could tell that what came next was difficult for him to speak about. The Zoroth Emperor was not a patient being, Hamath finally continued. He ruled 1,000 star systems through fear and strength. The loss of 300 warships was not just a military defeat. It was an insult to his power, an insult that demanded an overwhelming response. He shifted in his chair, his frail body moving slowly. The Emperor ordered the construction of the largest armada in galactic history. Every shipyard in the Imperium worked day and night. Every resource was devoted to a single purpose. Within 2 years, the Zoroth had assembled a fleet of 12,000 warships, carriers, destroyers, dreadnoughts, weapons capable of cracking planets, technology that had been kept secret for centuries, now deployed for a single mission. The destruction of humanity, Taylor said. Hamath nodded. The Emperor broadcast his intentions across every frequency in the galaxy. He wanted everyone to see what would happen to those who defied the Imperium. He promised that humanity would be erased, not conquered, not enslaved, erased. Every human world would be reduced to ash. Every human ship would be destroyed. Every trace of their civilization would be wiped from the galaxy. What did the other powers do? Nothing. The Melori protested quietly. The Vraxians expressed concern through diplomatic channels. But no one was willing to stand against the Zoroth. The Imperium was too powerful. And besides, most of the great powers were curious. They wanted to see what would happen when the galaxy's mightiest empire turned its full attention on these mysterious humans. Hamath's voice dropped lower. But before the fleet departed, something unexpected happened. A human diplomatic vessel appeared at the consortium border. A small ship, barely larger than a cargo shuttle. It carried a single passenger, a human woman who requested permission to address the gathered powers one final time. They allowed it. The Zoroth Emperor found it amusing. He thought she had come to beg for mercy. He ordered her brought before the full assembly of the great powers, so that everyone could witness humanity's surrender. Hamath closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was softer, more reverent, as if he was reciting something sacred. I was there that day. I saw her enter the great hall. She was small, as all humans are. Her hair was gray. Her face was lined with age. She walked slowly, carefully, like someone who had lived a long life and carried heavy burdens. The Zoroth Emperor laughed when he saw her. He asked if this week-old creature was the best humanity could send. What did she say? She stood before the assembly for a long moment without speaking, just looking at us, at all of us. The great powers of the galaxy gathered together, waiting to witness the extinction of her species. And in her eyes, I saw something that I did not understand at the time. What? Pity, Hamath whispered. She looked at us with pity. He opened his eyes, and Taylor saw tears gathering at their corners. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, quiet. She did not raise it. She did not shout or plead or threaten. She simply spoke, and somehow every being in that vast hall heard her perfectly. Hamath's voice shifted again, taking on a rhythm that suggested he was quoting from memory. She said, "We do not want war. We have never wanted war. We left our homeworld seeking only peace. We asked only to be left alone. We hoped that the galaxy would be different from the world that created us. We hoped that we had finally found a place where we could rest." He paused, gathering himself. She said, "But we understand now that peace is not something that can be given. It is something that must be earned, and we are prepared to earn it, whatever the cost." She said, "Your emperor believes that humanity is weak. He believes that our small ships and primitive weapons mean that we cannot defend ourselves. He is wrong. Our ships are small because we do not need large ones. Our weapons are primitive because we have not yet needed advanced ones. We have kept our true capabilities hidden because we hoped we would never need to use them." Hamath's voice grew quieter. She said, "We are what our world made us. Our planet tried to kill us every day for 2 million years. Ice Age is that lasted centuries. supervolcanoes that blocked out the sun, mass extinctions that destroyed nearly every living thing. And ourselves, we have been our own worst enemies since the beginning. We have killed each other in numbers that your species cannot imagine. We have invented ways to destroy ourselves that would make your weapons look like toys. She said, we survived all of this, not because we were the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. We survived because we could not be killed. We adapted. We learned. We became something that could endure any horror, any catastrophe, any enemy. The universe has been trying to destroy us since we first stood upright on the plains of our home world. We are still here. Hamath fell silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. She said, send your armada. We will not stop you. We will not fire the first shot. But understand this. We have been fighting since before your species discovered fire. We have made an art of war that you cannot imagine. And we have spent our entire existence preparing for the day when something bigger and stronger tried to destroy us. She looked directly at the Zoroth Emperor, and she said, you believe you are predators. You are mistaken. You have never met a predator. The room fell silent. Tayla could hear her own heartbeat, loud and fast in her ears. What happened then? She asked. She left. She walked out of the Great Hall, boarded her small ship, and returned to human space. The Zoroth Emperor was furious. He ordered the armada to depart immediately. 12,000 warships, carrying millions of soldiers, set course for the human border. Hamath looked out at the garden, his eyes distant. The fleet crossed into human space on what would become known as the Day of Silence. The Imperium had installed relay stations along the border to ensure constant communication with the armada. For the first 2 days, Admiral Vareth, who commanded the fleet, reported normal progress. No resistance. No sign of human military forces. He described the systems they passed as peaceful, almost beautiful. On the 3rd day, Admiral Vareth reported that they had entered a system containing a human colony world, a small planet, barely populated. He prepared to begin orbital bombardment as a demonstration of Zoroth power. Hamath's hands trembled slightly. His last transmission was strange. He said, the planet is not fighting back. They are just watching us, looking up at our fleet. Why are they not afraid? Why are they just standing there? Then the transmissions stopped. All of them, simultaneously, 12,000 warships, millions of crew members, every relay station, every communication system, silent, as if someone had simply turned them off. For 3 days, the galaxy watched and waited. The Zoroth Emperor demanded reports. The consortium monitored every frequency, but there was nothing. No distress signals, no sensor echoes, no debris, just silence. Hamath turned to look at Tayla directly. On the 4th day, a single message was broadcast from human space. It was addressed to the Zoroth Emperor personally. It said, we warned you. We asked politely. You did not listen. Your fleet is gone. Your soldiers are dead. We took no pleasure in this. We hope you understand now why we asked to be left alone. The message continued. We have no interest in your empire. We have no desire for conquest or revenge. We will not cross your borders. We will not threaten your worlds. But if you ever send another ship into our territory, we will come for you. Not your fleet, you, personally. And we will make sure that every being in the galaxy knows what happens to those who cannot accept a simple request for peace. The message ended with 3 words. Please, believe us. Hamath closed his eyes. The Zoroth Emperor received this message in his throne room, surrounded by his advisors and guards. According to witnesses, he read it 3 times. Then he stood up, walked to the nearest window, and stared out at the stars for nearly an hour without speaking. When he finally turned around, he was a different being. The arrogance was gone. The fury was gone. In its place was something that no one had ever seen in a Zoroth Emperor before: fear. He ordered all military operations against humanity suspended immediately. He recalled every scout, every probe, every surveillance drone. He commanded that no Zoroth vessel would ever approach human space again, under penalty of death. And then he did something that shocked the entire galaxy. He sent a formal apology to humanity. The Emperor of 1,000 worlds, the ruler of the most powerful empire in galactic history, apologized to the species he had tried to exterminate. Hamath opened his eyes, and in them Taylor saw the weight of 8 centuries of memory. The humans accepted his apology. They responded with a brief message thanking him for his understanding. They expressed hope that the two civilizations could coexist in peace. They asked only that their borders be respected, and that was the end of it. The Zoroth never spoke of what happened. The consortium never investigated. The maps were quietly redrawn, and the gray zone was born. Taylor sat in silence for a long moment, trying to process what she had heard. But what happened to the fleet? She asked. 12,000 ships cannot simply vanish. Hamath smiled, and it was a sad, tired smile. No one knows. Teyla left the hospice with her mind racing. Everything she thought she knew about galactic history had been wrong. The consortium was not built on cooperation and mutual respect. It was built on fear. Fear of a single species that had demonstrated, in the most terrible way possible, that they could not be conquered. Over the following days, she continued her research. Now that she knew what to look for, she found traces of the truth everywhere, hidden in old diplomatic archives, buried in classified military reports, scattered across the personal journals of beings who had lived through that terrible time. The aftermath of the Day of Silence had been even more significant than the event itself. The Zoroth Imperium did not fall to human weapons. The humans never crossed their borders, never struck their worlds, never demanded tribute or submission. They simply retreated behind their boundary line and waited, exactly as they had promised. But the Imperium fell anyway. The subject species of the Zoroth had watched the most powerful military in the galaxy vanish, without a trace. They had seen their conquerors humiliated by a species that most of them had never even heard of, and they had realized something that changed everything. If the Zoroth could not protect them from humanity, then the Zoroth could not protect them from anything. The rebellions began within months. The Kethri demanded independence. The Melori refused to pay tribute. The Vraxians, who had been plotting against the Imperium for centuries, finally found the courage to act openly. One by one, the 1,000 systems of the Zoroth Imperium declared their freedom. The Zoroth tried to respond with force, but their military had been crippled. Their best ships were gone. Their most experienced commanders had died in human space. And every time they tried to gather a new fleet, whispers would spread through the ranks. What if the humans decide we are a threat? What if they think we are preparing to attack them again? What if they come for us? The fear was more effective than any weapon. Zoroth soldiers deserted rather than fight. Zoroth commanders surrendered rather than risk drawing human attention. Within a generation, the mighty Imperium had crumbled into dust, replaced by dozens of smaller, weaker states that would eventually merge into the consortium. But Taylor found one detail that disturbed her more than anything else. The humans had not enforced their border with weapons or patrols. They had not built defensive stations or deployed warning systems. After the Day of Silence, they had simply drawn their boundary line and trusted that the galaxy would respect it. Any ship that approached the boundary simply received a polite, automated message. The message was broadcast in every known language, updated as new species entered the galactic community. It said, "You are approaching human territorial space. Entry is not permitted. Please adjust your course. We wish you safe travels." No threats, no warnings about consequences, just a calm request, and everyone obeyed. For 800 years, not a single ship had crossed that boundary. Not explorers, not scientists, not merchants or diplomats or military vessels. No one tested human patience. No one wanted to find out if the humans would respond the same way twice. Taylor understood now why her supervisor had been afraid. It was not fear of what the humans might do. It was fear of what questions might invite. What if humanity decided that the galaxy was becoming too curious? What if they interpreted investigation as provocation? What if they viewed Taylor's research as the first step toward a new conflict? She thought about stopping her investigation. She thought about destroying her notes, forgetting what she had learned, returning to her quiet life of organizing star charts and cataloging distant worlds. But she could not, because she had found one final piece of information, one detail that changed everything, hidden in the oldest archives of the consortium. She discovered records of a diplomatic summit held shortly after the Day of Silence. Representatives of every major power had gathered to discuss the human situation. They had debated for weeks, trying to understand what had happened and how to respond. In the end, they had reached a unanimous conclusion. The gray zone was not created to hide human space. It was created to protect humanity from itself. The diplomats at that summit had understood something that later generations forgot. Humanity had not wanted to destroy the Zoroth fleet. They had warned the Imperium. They had pleaded for peace. They had explained, in the clearest possible terms, that they did not want to fight. But when the Zoroth refused to listen, the humans had done what was necessary. They had protected their people in the only way they knew how. And then they had retreated, quietly and without celebration, because they were not proud of what they had done. The gray zone was humanity's gift to the galaxy, a way of removing themselves from temptation. If they were not on the maps, no one would accidentally stumble into their territory. If they were not part of the consortium, they would never be drawn into the political conflicts that plagued the great powers. If they stayed hidden, they would never again be forced to show the galaxy what they were capable of. The humans had chosen to become ghosts because they were afraid of what they might become if they stayed visible. Taylor found this deeply sad. She imagined billions of humans living behind their invisible wall, watching the galaxy from a distance, knowing that they could never fully participate in the civilization that surrounded them, not because they were forbidden, but because they did not trust themselves to interact peacefully. What kind of beings would exile themselves out of fear of their own nature? What kind of species would deliberately remove themselves from history to protect others from their strength? She was still wrestling with these questions when she learned about the probe. A faction of young Vraxian officers had grown tired of living in fear of ancient legends. They argued that the stories about humanity were exaggerated, that no species could truly be as dangerous as the elders claimed, that 800 years of peace had made the old ones paranoid and weak. They had constructed a probe drone, a small, unmanned vessel equipped with sensors and recording equipment. They planned to send it into human space, just to observe, just to gather data. If the probe returned safely, they reasoned, it would prove that the humans were not as terrifying as everyone believed. And if the probe was destroyed, well, it was just a drone. No one would be harmed. Taylor tried to stop them. She approached the Vraxian leadership with her research. She showed them Hamath's testimony. She explained what had happened to the Zoroth Imperium. She begged them to understand that some risks were too great to take. But the young officers dismissed her. They called her a fearful academic, trapped in the superstitions of the past. They laughed at her warnings and proceeded with their mission. The probe launched on a quiet morning, 3 weeks after Taylor first discovered the gray zone. It crossed the border without incident. It transmitted sensor data for nearly 12 hours, revealing nothing but peaceful star systems and ordinary worlds. Then the transmission stopped. Taylor waited for the consequences. She expected human warships to appear at the border. She expected demands and threats and perhaps even violence. She expected the galaxy to finally see the truth about humanity that she had spent weeks uncovering. Instead, she saw something that shocked her far more than any display of force. A human ship appeared at the consortium border. Not a warship, not an armada, a small diplomatic vessel, barely larger than the probe it had presumably destroyed. It carried a single passenger, the first human anyone had seen in over 700 years. The consortium council scrambled to respond. They convened an emergency session. They debated how to react. They argued about protocol and precedent and the dangers of interacting with beings who had erased the most powerful empire in galactic history. But before they could reach any decision, the human sent a simple message. It said, "May I speak with you?" The council agreed. They had no other choice. And so, for the first time in 8 centuries, a human stood before the gathered representatives of the consortium. Taylor watched from the observer's gallery, her heart pounding. The human was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes. He wore simple clothing, without rank insignia or weapons or any sign of military authority. He walked slowly, carefully, like someone who was aware of his own strength and afraid of using it carelessly. When he reached the center of the chamber, He stopped and looked around at the assembled representatives, hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all staring at him with a mixture of fear and fascination. And then he smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine, the kind of smile that grandparents give to children they love. And somehow, despite everything she knew about what his species was capable of, Taylor found herself wanting to trust him. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," he said. His voice was soft, gentle, nothing like the voice of a being who came from a civilization that could destroy empires. "I know you must be frightened. I know the stories you have heard about us. I want you to know that we understand why you are afraid." He paused, looking around the chamber. "We detected your probe. We know that some of you are curious about us. We understand curiosity. We were young once too. We explored every corner of our world and then reached for the stars. Curiosity is not a sin." He took a deep breath. The human stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by hundreds of representatives from every major species in the consortium. His gray hair caught the light of the great hall's artificial sun. His kind eyes moved slowly across the assembled crowd, meeting the gaze of beings who had grown up on stories of human destruction. "We are not hiding," he said. His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle. "We are not building weapons. We are not preparing for conquest. We did not retreat behind our borders because we wanted to strike when you least expected it." He paused, and in that pause, Taylor could feel the weight of 800 years of fear pressing down on the chamber. "We removed ourselves from galactic affairs because we recognized something about ourselves that frightened us." The human's hands came together in front of him, fingers intertwining slowly. "We are very, very good at violence, better than we ever wanted to be. Our world made us this way. For 2 million years, we fought everything. The cold, the heat, the predators, the diseases, the famines, and most of all, we fought each other." He looked down at his hands. "We invented weapons that could destroy cities in a flash of light. We built machines that could poison the air and water for generations. We created ways to kill each other that were so horrible, so efficient, so complete, that we had to invent new words just to describe them." His voice grew quieter. "And then we turned around and invented medicine, art, music, philosophy. We built hospitals and schools and libraries. We created governments that protected the weak from the strong. We developed systems of law and justice that tried to ensure fairness for everyone." He looked up again, meeting the eyes of the representatives. "This is who we are. We are capable of the most terrible destruction and the most beautiful creation. We can be monsters and saints sometimes in the same moment, and we never know, from one day to the next, which side of our nature will win." The chamber remained silent. Taylor saw some representatives shifting uncomfortably. Others were completely still, barely breathing. "When we first came to the stars," the human continued, "we hoped that we had left our violent nature behind. We thought that the vastness of space would give us room to grow beyond our old patterns. We hoped that we could be different." He smiled sadly. "And then the Zoroth came. They would not listen to our requests. They would not accept our offers of peace. They forced us to show them what we really are." His smile faded. "We did not enjoy it. We took no pleasure in their destruction. We mourned every life that was lost on both sides. And afterwards, we looked at what we had done and we were afraid. Not afraid of the Zoroth, not afraid of the other great powers. We were afraid of ourselves." He began to walk slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silent chamber. "We decided, long ago, that the kindest thing we could do for the galaxy was to stay home, to tend our own gardens, to let others live in peace without the shadow of our presence hanging over them. We drew our own boundary. We guarded ourselves, not to keep you out, but to keep ourselves in, because we know what we become when we are pushed. We know what we are capable of, and we do not want to be that again." He stopped in front of the Consortium Council's central platform, looking up at the gathered leaders. "Your probe was destroyed because we could not allow it to continue into our space. We do not know what your intentions were. Perhaps you simply wanted information. Perhaps you were curious. But we learned long ago that curiosity can become suspicion, and suspicion can become fear, and fear can become violence. We chose to end the intrusion quickly and quietly, without escalation. We hoped that would be the end of it. But then we realized that perhaps the galaxy had forgotten why we withdrew. Perhaps the old stories have become myths. Perhaps you no longer believe that we are dangerous. The human reached into his clothing and withdrew a small data chip. He placed it carefully on the platform in front of the council. This contains an invitation, he said. If the consortium ever faces a threat it cannot handle, if some danger rises that threatens to destroy everything you have built, if you truly need help that no one else can provide. He stepped back from the platform. You may open a channel to us. We will come, not as conquerors, not as masters, as protectors, because we remember what it was like to be small and scared in a hostile universe, because we know what it feels like to face enemies that are stronger and more numerous, because, despite everything, we still believe that life is precious and worth protecting. His voice grew quieter, almost sad. But understand this. If you call us, and we come, we will end the threat, completely, permanently, in ways that you will not want to watch. That is who we are. That is what Earth made us. We cannot be anything else. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, one of the elder Kethri representatives rose to her feet. And if we choose never to call you? She asked. Her voice was steady, but Taylor could hear the fear beneath it. If we choose to handle our own problems, no matter how great. The human smiled at her. It was a genuine smile, full of warmth and understanding. Then we wish you peace and prosperity, he said. We will remain behind our border, tending our gardens, raising our children, living our lives. We will watch the stars from afar and hope that you thrive. He turned to leave, then paused at the entrance to the chamber. We never wanted to be your nightmare, he said, not looking back. We just wanted to be left alone. We hope that now, finally, you understand why. And then he was gone. Taylor watched his small diplomatic vessel disappear into the void, heading back toward the gray zone that everyone knew better than to question. Around her, the representatives of 100 species began to murmur and whisper, processing what they had just witnessed. But Taylor understood now. She understood everything. The gray zone on every map was not a mark of conquest or threat. It was a mark of restraint, a promise kept for 800 years, that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy would police themselves, so that others would not have to be afraid. The humans had looked at what they were capable of and made a choice. They chose isolation over dominance. They chose peace over power. They chose to become ghosts, to fade from history, to let the galaxy forget their terrible strength, also that others could live without fear. And perhaps that was the most human thing of all. Not their strength, not their capacity for violence, not their ability to destroy empires and erase civilizations, but their choice not to. Taylor returned to her office at the Galactic Cartographic Institute. She sat down at her terminal and opened the master archive of star charts. The gray zone stared back at her, blank and silent, as it had been for 800 years. She thought about changing it, about filling in the missing systems, labeling the worlds, documenting the civilizations that had once existed there, about telling the truth that everyone had agreed to forget. But then she thought about the human's kind eyes and sad smile. She thought about his words, "We never wanted to be your nightmare." She closed the archive without making any changes. Some doors, she realized, were left closed out of love, and some maps were left blank not because of what was hidden there, but because of what might emerge if anyone looked too closely. Outside her window, the stars of the galaxy gleamed with cold, distant light. Somewhere out there, beyond the invisible boundary that everyone respected, humanity tended their gardens and raised their children and watched the void with patient, ancient eyes, waiting, hoping, praying that no one would ever need to call them, and that they would never again have to show the galaxy what they really were. Taylor turned off her terminal and went home. She would keep the secret. She would let the gray zone remain gray. She would allow the maps to stay blank, because she understood now that the blank space was not an absence of information. It was a gift. The most terrible beings in the galaxy had chosen to become invisible, so that everyone else could sleep peacefully at night. They had built their own cage and locked themselves inside. They guarded it not to keep others out, but to keep their own nature contained. And the least the galaxy could do was respect their sacrifice. Taylor looked up at the stars one last time before entering her quarters. Thank you, she thought silently, speaking to beings she would never meet, across a boundary she would never cross. Thank you for choosing to be kind. And somewhere, in the vast quiet of human space, perhaps someone heard her. Perhaps they smiled. Perhaps they whispered back, "You are welcome. Please stay safe. We will be here if you need us. But we hope you never do."